Hi, I'm John Whitledge of Whitledge Designs, and today I'm here with Steve McCormack, legendary audio component designer,
Thank you.
whose career has spanned more than 30 years. He's most probably best known for the commercialization and manufacturing of Tiptoes and the DNA line of amplifiers, which are highly regarded and are very relevant even today, which were designed almost 20 years ago.
Tiptoes being the pointed feet that you see under so many high-end audio components, both speakers and electronics.
Almost ubiquitous now.
Almost, yeah.
Underneath almost everything.
Yeah.
The Steve's career has covered retail sales, manufacturing, equipment design, recording, mixing, editing, mastering. He's worked with Jim Murad's Blueport Jazz label and recorded and made CDs of some of the best jazz musicians in the industry under the Blueport Jazz label. And he founded SMC Audio in, the DNA line was, of course, under McCormack.
McCormack Audio started in the late 80s.
Late 80s, yeah.
Yeah.
And then SMC Audio was founded in
About 98.
98. And
Yeah.
principally the work is focused on developing your new reference level.
Well, that and doing the upgrade work on my earlier gear, which would be sort of like a speed shop for cars,
Yeah.
would be the analogy. People send me the earlier amplifiers and preamplifiers, which I rebuild for even higher levels of performance. So SMC Audio has been dedicated to that, but then more recently I've gotten back into doing reference level component design. By that I mean no holds barred, my statement pieces. I get to build the best things that I possibly can. So that's come out in the form of the VRE1 preamplifier, the reference preamp.
Well, I can assure the listeners of Car Audio and Electronics, or the readers of Car Audio and Electronics magazine, that the VRE1 is really something. I mean, you look under the hood, it's the best of everything, and you listen to it, and it's a sonic revelation. And it's not just me saying that, it's the entire industry. So congratulations on that VRE1.
Thank you very much. That's been a long, long labor
How many
of
years
love.
was that?
Well, it took about 6 years probably, depending on how you'd like to define it. But that was the most difficult thing I've ever done, because I wanted to make a product that didn't simply sound good, but really, as much as possible, got out of the way, did not impose its own character, did not limit anything in the original recording, just really got to the truth of what was in the original recording without any editorializing or adding or subtracting. It's when you try to push it to the limit of what's possible, that becomes a very difficult proposition. I could have stopped anywhere along the line and said, well, it's good enough, but we're both here because we're perfectionists. So that's kind of the part of it that was challenging and fun, was to keep pushing it to that point where I thought I had finally succeeded in achieving all of my goals. But it took a long time. It was a very difficult road. So
It's an amazing piece. I mean, would you like to talk about some of the innovations of that piece?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
But I first of all, I want to thank Ben O, the editor of the Car Audio and Electronics magazine, for giving me this opportunity to address you folks. And the whole reason that we're here, of course, is because of John's work in the car audio field and his work with the so-called magic bus, trying to make the very best possible, the highest performance possible mobile audio system, and the degree to which that begins to be comparable to a fine home audio system. Normally the worlds of home audio and car audio don't really overlap very much. We have some common interests, certainly, in how we listen to music or our love for music, but cars are inherently a very different environment than the home. And for whatever reason, you don't. There's a lot of people who are home audiophile hobbyists and car audiophile hobbyists, And there's a little overlap. Sometimes you find some people who are both, but most of the time they're kind of different worlds. So it's interesting for us to talk about this because of the work that John has done in the Magic Bus has largely been to control the acoustics of that environment, which has been a very difficult effort, to make it more like, well, it goes actually well beyond a typical home and more to like a studio environment, very controlled acoustics, which has taken up a lot of your work with the custom fitted acoustic control components of the van, and then the speakers, all of the custom work in designing and building and integrating the speaker system. So I got involved with John because he was looking to me for some guidance in getting the best possible sound, but his point of view had to do more with what we hear in a good home system. And he wanted me to, to bring my expertise to bear on that part of the equation. He was used to doing competing in the car audio arena, but the philosophy or the point of view is somewhat different. So he came to me and said, how does this stack up from your point of view? And so from my perspective as a recording and mastering engineer and an equipment designer who works with very neutral, very accurate, wide dynamic range systems in the home and in my studio, it was quite different. And so we talked about those differences and how what he might have to do in order to change it to make it more like a good home audio system, which led ultimately to the development of the Magic Bus, which has been a long and difficult road for John, because he's put a phenomenal amount of work into the Magic Bus, and it's just now finally essentially completed, or 98% completed or something. Yeah, we're down to sort of the final.
Some say it'll never be done.
It's an ongoing project.
Yeah.
But no, we're getting pretty darn close, and it really is an incredible thing to hear, because it does so many things incredibly well, and in many respects goes even well beyond what you normally find in a home system, from the standpoint of dynamic impact and power in the bass, especially. It's right up there with the best of anything that I've ever heard, and just in overall characteristics, it's extraordinarily good. So my hat's off to you for all of the work that you've done in that. It's an amazing accomplishment.
Thank you.
And you should be very proud of all the work that you've done on it.
Oh, thanks. The readers of Car Audio and Electronics magazine probably are familiar with my first van, which was featured in an article entitled Weird Science. And it was a Volkswagen Eurovan with Dynaudio loudspeakers and Macintosh equipment. And that's what Steve heard in about 2004 when I first met Steve at the Consumer Electronics Show.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve graciously invited me to his laboratory and graciously offered to take a listen to it. And his comments and his inspiration basically led me to the conclusion that I had to start from scratch, despite the fact that this was a reasonably good system and won many trophies. I realized that if I wanted to take it to the next level and get serious about audio, I had to start from scratch, and that's what led to the Mercedes van, and then this 6-year journey to try to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, some of the readers would probably are curious to know if you've ever owned a home audio system or a car audio system, and if you have any experience in that regard.
Well, I have to confess honestly that I have very little experience in that regard. Like I mentioned earlier, there hasn't been a lot of overlap between car audio and home audio, even though fundamentally a lot of our interests are the same or very similar. But I did some work in cars. This goes back a long time when I was selling equipment back in the 1970s. And I just, I didn't like working in cars or working on cars. It just, for whatever reason, didn't fit my personality and my preferences. So I enjoyed working in the home, doing home hobbyist audio, and that's where my focus has always been. So I've never put any special emphasis on my car audio system. I enjoy listening to music when I'm traveling, but for me that can be anything from a typical car radio to my iPhone, with some headphones on or something like that. So I like music in the car, but I haven't gone out of my way to make a special car audio system. As you know very well, I've spent endless time and energy doing home audio and setting up my mastering studio, and I'm constantly working on those sorts of things. So that's where my focus has been.
Do you think that some of that, I mean, historically, in the early days, we had equalizers, but they were of analog nature, and there was no digital time delay. So maybe the car audio was limited a little bit in the beginning, and then maybe with the advent of some modern technology like DSP, including time alignment and equalization, do you think that is helping car audio to progress to the point where it can be better than it used to be?
I think that the modern technologies that you're talking about, especially the DSP-based systems, are a phenomenal improvement over the old analog stuff of the past. And this is an interesting departure between home audio and car audio, because equalizers have always been an important part of car audio. And probably all the readers will remember, I don't know how far back we have to go, but most advanced car audio systems had a multi-band equalizer built right in, or part of the deal, where people could EQ the net result for their particular car and their taste. But that was still a relatively crude way to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas now you have very accurate DSP EQ, oftentimes parametric in nature, and time delay as well, as you say. This may only show up to the user as a kind of a tone control interface, but for more advanced users with more advanced systems, they will have some sort of an interface that gives them access to the power of that DSP to control the parameters in their car in a very accurate, detailed kind of way. So yeah, it's a hugely powerful tool, and makes it much easier to overcome a lot of the inherent limitations of cars as an environment for good sound.
When I guess continuing along those same lines, it seems that home audiophiles typically eschew the use of equalization and processing and things, and their belief is that the use of those things may interfere with the sonic purity of the system. And so maybe you could comment on the pros. I mean, some of my reading has shown that if you do actually correct the frequency response, you are actually improving the phase, and you are actually improving what you hear in the environment in which you're hearing it. So could you talk about maybe some of the pros and cons as you've seen it and maybe what your thoughts are on that?
Well, it's an interesting point of difference again between home audio as a hobby and car audio and recording in the world of musicians. And home audio is a kind of a special case where the emphasis for a number of years now has tended to be on purity, simplicity and purity. That's not always the case. I'm generalizing, but that's why when we get into the realm of what we would call high-end audio electronics, the preamplifiers or integrated amplifiers typically don't have tone controls anymore. And indeed, it's been difficult for manufacturers to sell any products that have those things built in. Again, in the realm of what we're talking about as high-end audio, when you get to receivers and other more typical integrated amplifiers, they will still often have basic tone controls. But until you get really into the area of modern DSP-based systems, where you begin to see some extremely powerful EQing tools again, and things like room correction, active room correction, and that sort of thing, you don't find much interest from home audiophiles. They're concerned about purity, for lack of a better term, and they're concerned that adding additional, especially analog circuitry, may compromise the transparency and clarity of their systems. And a lot of home audiophiles still have a concern about DSP-based systems, because if they're going from an analog domain to a digital domain, back to an analog domain, or have to make the conversions between analog and digital, a lot of people find this worrisome. They feel like they're going to be losing some quality there. And I think those feelings and those opinions are based in some fact going back into the past. But I don't think it's really true, or doesn't need to be true any longer. The tools that are now available and are becoming more available are the DSP-based digital systems are extraordinarily powerful. And I can think of a number of examples now where there are mixed signal systems going from analog to digital and back again, where the net outcome, the final result, is among some of the finest sound I've ever heard in my life. So I've been shown very dramatically that degradation need not be part of that equation. And so I think that moving forward, more home audio based systems will begin to include more options for EQing and control of various parameters in the playback, which will be ultimately good for everybody. But the irony of this is that it's taking computer-based playback systems, modern music servers, and the growth of that aspect of the industry to make that possible. And I suppose, ironically, these kinds of tools may first become more commonly available in lower-end equipment. Because the larger companies, the big multinational conglomerates, have the resources to make this stuff at relatively low cost and to incorporate these kinds of tools, because they put a DSP chip in there that's got the power to do it. So why not go ahead and do these things? So I mean, that includes even active room correction. Becomes relatively simple to do those things and not very expensive to include them. But up at the very high end, you still have people with tube and solid state equipment that's all analog and very straight line, not including any processing or effects. And that's still the way most people want that. It's interesting for me as a recording engineer and a mastering engineer, because I sort of wear different hats depending on what I'm doing. When I'm wearing my audiophile hat and going for music playback, my system is very simple and straight line and pure. But when I'm editing and mastering music, I depend on some very sophisticated computer-based tools, including equalizers, and parametric EQ, and tools that shape the sound and may add ambient reverberation patterns and things like that. Some that depend on very powerful DSP-based computing software to make that all work. So maybe there's a little irony there, but we try, we're trying to keep the recordings as pure, quote unquote, and as true to the original as possible. But in order to do that, sometimes we have to do some rather sophisticated processing to correct problems that are inherent in the original recording, and to make the final result sound as close to the original as possible. So DSP, modern DSP tools are becoming more common, more important, and the average car user, custom car user and installer may be very much at home with those things now. The average home audiophile has still got a ways to go to learn more about those, but that's happening, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I think we will ultimately will come full circle probably in a few more years, where home audiophiles, because of the computer-based servers that they have, will have access to a form of equalization and tone control, if you will, that harkens back to the old days when it was analog, but now it will be all digital, and they'll have the ability to make subtle or large corrections to the playback in their systems, either as just a matter of taste or to correct for room problems, etc. So I think we'll ultimately all be on the same page there.